Much of what we learn about science, nature, and the environment happens outside of school and beyond the walls of museums, zoos, and nature centers. I have worked as an independent environmental professional for many years and know there are others like me who interact with the public in communities worldwide. On the Talaterra podcast, we discover who these professionals are, what they do, and how they create change. Why do I focus on independent professionals? I focus on them because they move freely through communities. They move freely between schools, organizations, businesses, programs, and other informal learning environments. They are positioned to meet the public where they are, and this is powerful. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Tanya Marion. Hi, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Bill Reynolds, Lars Wohlers, and Mike Mayer, co-founders of Experiential Interpretive Design, a coaching company they founded to help individuals, organizations, and sites develop the interpretive experiences they provide. In part one of my conversation with Bill, Lars, and Mike, we learned more about them, their respective specialties, and why they founded EID. Today is part two of this conversation. And in this episode, I sit down with Mike Mayer to discuss his specialty, environmental education, and to learn more about the environmental program that inspires what he, Bill, and Lars do at EID. We begin the episode learning more about the Institute for Earth Education. Some of this might sound familiar to you because I included a short segment in part one. Don't let this distract you because you'll hear something a bit different before Mike walks us through an example of the type of programming offered by the Institute. In today's conversation, Mike and I discuss the creation of holistic experiences in free choice settings, the Amore framework developed by Steve Van Meter, interpreting global topics across cultures, and what might change the status quo in environmental education. Thanks for coming back to listen to part two. Let's join the conversation. All of you have mentioned some connection to the Institute for Earth Education. Can you tell us about the Institute and how is it the same and different from the environmental education we tend to encounter today?
Well, the Institute for Earth Education was founded back in the 1970s. Originally, the programs were designed for a summer residential camp for boys, and it had a series of kind of as I explained, talking about myself. The director of the nature program was like, collecting leaves, pithing frogs, pinning insects is not what we want these campers to leave with. We want them to leave with a rich firsthand experience with the natural world, an emotional connection that, these are the systems of life that keep us alive and all life alive on the earth. And they're just amazing. And then some better understandings of how those systems of life better operate, how they operate in our lives on a day-to-day basis. So first making that emotional connection, and then more of the understandings, and then how to incorporate those understandings and those feelings into your daily life so you can live in more harmony with the earth and its systems of life and other creatures on the earth. So that's kind of the heartbeat of Earth Education and the Institute for Earth Education. Now, environmental education is a little bit different in the sense that it often got influenced by where was the money and what can we do to make sure that we can incorporate what maybe grants or funders or even government funding wants us to do so we can utilize that money to continue to exist. There were some change, and obviously on the political level, there were massive changes in the 1970s. The Endangered Species Act was created in the 1970s. The Environmental Protection Agency, the first Earth Days. And yet it seems like we have not been able to capitalize on that, because if you look at where we are now, after almost 60 years of environmental education, we're almost in worse shape than we were before because of climate change. There are definitely some silo areas that are better. Water is cleaner. There's no doubt about it. Air is cleaner. We are more aware of endangered species. But our level of consumption, our level of unconcern about many of our actions is still at I would say, a record high level. So Earth education really tried to, through development of well-crafted programs, not just activities, but programs to help incorporate those better understandings, better, deeper feelings, and how to incorporate those. And that takes time. It's not just a one-day thing. It's not just an hour at a nature center. This has to take place over time. And much of our public education, much of our many of our interpretive sites, and even many of our nature centers and environmental centers, they have people for one day, they take them on a hike, they show them some things, and then they go home. Okay. How do they prepare them for that? What outcome do they want? And how are they going to use that information afterwards? And that is that piece, that afterwards piece, I think has been really missing in environmental education. And the longevity. How do we, whether you're learning to play piano or tennis, you go through specific steps to learn how to do that, a programmatic approach. And that has not been what environmental education has done. It has developed a series of activities that they felt like teachers or leaders could do on a short-term basis. And Earth education has tried to say, we have a 3-day program that has things that are going to happen afterwards at home at school, or we have a 5-day program, things that are going to happen and incorporate into your life. So I think that's the big difference. The infusion method was used by environmental education, and the programmatic method is used more by Earth education. Hope that made sense.
Yes, it absolutely does. And so what is an example of an Earth Institute program?
Okay. A really good example is the Earth Keepers program. And this is a program designed for 9 to 11-year-olds. Ideally, they come out to a residential site and they spend 3 days there, 2 nights and 3 days. And even before they come out, the center would send an invitation letter from a serious nature lover called EM, with a letter inviting them to become Earth Keepers because the Earth needs more Earth Keepers, and a large Hobbit-sized map that shows all the things that might be going on, where the Munchline Monitors is happening, where the Valley of the Dinosaurs might be, where Magic Spots area, where Connector and Spectre will be found. So it gives them a chance to do what we like to call the S&Ss, the sit and stares while they're thinking about this field trip they're going to go on. So they come out, they get an introduction to what they'll be doing, and then they immediately go out with a manual and their diary, and they do their first activity. One is learning about energy flow. It's called Munchline Monitor, and they find how energy flows from the sun to the plants, to the plant eaters, to the animal eaters. We call them munchers, sun munchers, plant munchers, animal munchers. So we try to put it in those terms. And they have a tray, like a tray they would get in a lunchroom. That's why we call it Munchline Monitors. and they use the tray to kind of help them. There's a lot of visuals. So it's very hands-on. and then they write an example of a munch line right in their area, right there in the natural world that they can notice that would be happening in my case, in the desert or in the forest or in a wetland. So it's very hands-on. It's about an hour long. And so that's an example of munchline monitors. Then there's one on the cycles of material, which is air, water, and soil, which is called the Great Spectacle. And then there is time capsules, which looks at change over time, where they actually dig up capsules that have examples of what the Earth was like in the past. And then there's the connection inspection, where they get hooked up in this giant web to show how different life is connected and where they get their energy, their water, their air, and their soil. So those are kind of the knowledge activities. So think of knowledge with a K, okay? There are also some what we call experiential activities, experience activities, where they find a place where they can sit by themselves that they go back to all 3 days and just sit alone in nature for 10, 15 minutes. Because a lot of kids have never done that. There's an earth walk, which is for observation. There's a discovery walk where they follow M's diary in a small map and discover different things they can find. And then there's an immersing activity where they get immersed in the one particular season of the year, depending when they come out. So that's the experience. So we got a K, we have an E. Well, after they do some of those activities, they earn a key that unlocks a box that then helps them see what the secret to becoming an Earth Keeper is. And each box has a different secret in it. The first box actually has a little key ring that they can put the key on, and then they can attach to their belt. The second one has the E box has a little apprentice card to show that they're apprentice Earth Keepers. So that's the kind of thing that goes on at the center. Now back at home, they can't earn their other two keys until they've done some things to reduce the amount of energy they use and the amount of materials they use. And they do some experiential activities like find their own magic spot around their home, or maybe lead somebody on an observation walk or a discovery walk. Then they can have their parents or their teachers sign off on their Y key. In the classroom, then, there's a Y box. They can open it with the Y key. They get their next thing, which is a little button that says My Earth. And finally, they share these activities with someone else who hasn't been to the Earth Keepers Training Center, a parent, a friend, a kid who couldn't go out. And then from sharing those activities, they can then open the final box, which is an S key. So we had yourself, the Y, the S for the sharing. So that we've spelled out the word keys, knowledge, experience, yourself, sharing. They get the final key. They find out who M really is, and they become an official Earth Keeper. And, we're talking about close to, they're away from their school site maybe for 2.5, 3 days, but then there's another month before they can get their Y key, so it becomes a habit. And then they have to do their S key. So this is like, 5-6 weeks to really get a good understanding of how the Earth operates and their connection to the Earth. So that's an example. There's other ones. There's one for middle school called Sunship 3. There's a longer one called Sunship Earth that's also for 9 to 11-year-olds. It's a 5-day program. And there's others in development. There's also some adult experiences as well that are being done. So hope I haven't gone on too long.
No, you haven't at all. Okay. And so for the K-12 students, it's a very thoughtful and planned out experience. I mean, it involves a lot of cooperation with the teachers, with the parents. And how much time does it take before the actual 2 to 3 day, camp experience? How long does that take? And then also, how do you follow up after the fact? I know that you can contact the teachers and the parents, but how do you know how well each program went with each cohort that goes through?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we do want to be able to document that not only has the program been successful, but there has been an effect in people's lives. And we're real lucky, here in Tucson, I work with Bruce Johnson. I have over the years at the Earth Education research team. And he is in the College of Education here. He's just recently retired. But he has spent the last 2 decades collecting research quality information on how students who have gone through these programs have changed their behaviors and changed their attitudes, and has published several articles in peer-reviewed magazines, journals. So, and we continue to collect data on that. So, because we want to make sure that we're not just doing this and nothing is happening. If there's no change, there's no point, is our feeling. So, how do we kind of build this in? Well, one of the things we do is, like when I was the director at the center that ran this program, we would meet with those teachers who are bringing their students out for, an evening, and kind of go through the whole program with them, like over an hour and a half. So we met with the teachers. We sometimes would have a day-long workshop that some of the teachers would want to attend, or those who wanted to see if they wanted to bring their students out could attend. It's called Earth Keeper Program Day. And we would do some of the activities and explain some of the activities over the course of that day. If they needed one of our staff members to be there when they had a parent meeting about the field trip, we would go and we would talk about some of the expectations. Let's see, what else did we do? So that was kind of the pre-visit. We wanted to make it as comfortable as possible. We helped them with transportation. We often got scholarship money if they needed some money to help with finances or food. And then, of course, sending that material I explained, the letter from M, printing all that off and getting it ready. So that's all the pre-stuff. Afterwards, we would help the teachers set up, a place, kind of an Earth Keeper's Corner in their room. We would come and visit every once in a while and see if they needed help passing out the keys, especially teachers who had done it the very first year. We might kind of help give them some support and work with them on doing that. And we also had students, in terms of the research end, they would fill out a questionnaire before they came. Then they would fill out a questionnaire about 2 weeks after they attended the session. And then they would fill out another questionnaire maybe 3 months afterwards, depending on what kind of research project was going on that Bruce had. So that's how we gathered the information to see if it was effective or not. And we were also lucky because we had graduate students from the College of Education at the University of Arizona and some undergraduate students that would help us both in leading and collecting. So, that's a whole nother chunk of time. And of course, available for questions. And the final thing we did was at the end of the school year, all the students who had earned all 4 of their keys with their parents and their teachers could come out and spend an evening at the center. We'd provide, a meal, a little cookout. They'd get to visit some of their magic spots. So we really wanted to reinforce that, hey, they were really doing something great for themselves and for the earth.
Oh, yes. That sounds just fantastic. A really rich program for all involved. It's a very multi-generational conversation and program. So this Earth Institute has one location, or are there several locations where this is taught?
That's kind of a yes and no question.
Okay.
there is an international headquarters in Greenville, West Virginia for the Institute for Earth Education. There are also, you might call branches or affiliates. We have those in Great Britain. We have one in China, Taiwan. We have one in the Czech Republic. We have one in Japan. There's currently one in Bolivia. So yes, it's an international network of people, and then there are other folks, who are doing work in the Netherlands, in Germany, Canada. And some of those programs that program I described, and some other ones are set up in those places, or they're running Earth education experience like Earth walks, Muir treks, other things, Earth education things.
Oh, thank you. You and Bill and Lars are applying what you've learned and experienced yourself from the Earth Institute into your conversations with the people you coach with through EID coaching. And you're helping them help themselves is it's what you do. It's how you help others move their own initiatives forward. But some of these sites or the groups that you work with, these are people who aren't set up for that type of an immersive experience, but you still are helping them create a holistic experience, even though they don't necessarily have a lot of time with their visitors. So when you work with coaching clients and sites or interpreters, guides, community-based educators, whoever they may be, when you help people create a more holistic experience, they are in settings where visitors are in more control over their time and attention. Mm-hmm. And then it's also a setting where there isn't an opportunity for repeat opportunities for engaging with the same type of people. And so how does what you just described, how is that transferred into these types of, what are called like free choice learning settings? These are, shorter conversations.
Yeah. And what the program I described, with Earthkeepers, we have a captive audience, and with interpretive services, interpretive planning, we're talking about leisure time visitors. So they have much more control over their time. So it becomes very important then for a site to have a mission that is very clear and specific outcomes that they want different visitor types to take away. And those outcomes might change seasonally. They might change annually. They might change over whatever period of time. But we feel like, as coaches, that it's very important that the interpretive planners think about what they want their visitors to remember and leave with in their heads, in their hearts, in their hands, in their stomachs. And how does that tie to the place? What makes your place so unique that people want to go there? And how is that uniqueness, how might it be connected to other sites that can fill in other pieces of the puzzle of what you're trying to get across? Because there's kind of the old adage, don't try to say in 1 hour what you have learned in 10 years. It's just going to overwhelm people. So what can your site do really well that is going to help people better understand why you are there? At Métis Crossing, it was like, which is it's a cultural site in Canada, for the Métis people of Alberta. It was, hey, we want folks to know that we are a thriving community that has been here for a long time, and we have something to offer that is rich in culture and in many different ways. And we want you to come and find out who we are. Now, what kind of experiences then? And the busload of people coming, international travelers, are going to have different kinds of expectations and want different kinds of experiences than the eighth graders that are coming out, different from the family of four that's coming out, different from the couple so, okay, how do we incorporate all of that so that there are some outcomes for all those types? So our coaching hopefully gives them this process that we use in EID to work through mission, to work through outcomes, to work through how we're going to motivate people to participate. How do we organize these things? How do we reinforce it in other places? And how, once again, we go back to evaluation. How do we evaluate what we've done to see if we've achieved what we really wanted to achieve? So it's, I don't think you can throw something like this together in a weekend. And it's a process. You get it started. And maybe you just pick one piece of your site that you're going to start with and you add to it. Because I know as an educator and have worked in, interpretive sites, it's easy to get overwhelmed. When the busload shows up, you got to be there. And then another busload shows up. So, we understand that, a lot of these places are underfunded, understaffed. So you take your time, you start somewhere, and you move forward because you want people to come back. You want people to remember you in a positive way, and you want people to support you both financially and word of mouth to say, wow, you got to go to that place. You don't want to miss what they do. And that's the key, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to evaluation for a second.
Sure.
Amore.
Yes.
In Stephen Marder's book. Could you explain what the acronym means and stands for and what the overall process is?
Sure. So the Amore process is kind of at the end of the 15 steps that we like to help coach with interpretive sites. We start with the mission, the message, if there are any images that they might have, the welcome, the guiding, the orientation, then the head, the heart, the hands, the hunger. And then those last parts are actually what those are the experiences you want. And you're going to incorporate all this other stuff, those other steps I mentioned. So the A in Amore is achieve. What do I want this particular experience to achieve? The M is for how do I motivate people to participate in this experience? The O is for organize. How do I organize my material so that it's easy for folks to grasp and understand? What kind of tools are you going to use? Is it a diorama? Is it a hands-on thing? Is it a walk? How am I going to organize it? Am I going to reinforce this, or where am I going to reinforce this idea, this outcome for this experience elsewhere on the site? And finally, how am I going to evaluate to see if I've really achieved what I wanted to achieve? And that requires feedback from those people who have gone through the experience. And that can be immediate feedback. That could be social media feedback. That could be, writing something out that, your favorite part of the experience, and you post it on a board somewhere so that others can see it. There are all kinds of ways to do that. And Lars is really the expert in evaluation. He's created software, and that's where his expertise really is. So I kind of defer to him. But basically, that's Amore. And that's the experiences that help reinforce the mission, the place, the message. And within each of those experiences, you want to do something for the head, the heart, the hands, not always for the hunger, but eventually, people want to sit down and eat somewhere.
Yes, yes. Okay, so I've read that you did international training, and
Yes.
you were the former international training and international translation coordinator for Earth Institute. I have a question about interpreting global concepts across cultures. Let's take the topic of climate change, for example. We can talk about it and write about it in English. We could translate materials, but then what has been your experience in saying a topic about climate change? How does the interpretation of that topic need to change from culture to culture?
Well, I haven't done as much of the interpretive workshop work on the international level as I have the earth education work. I would say, first of all, we have to meet people where they are right now. What is it that they are doing? What is it that they would like to change about their lifestyle or what they're doing? And developing a discussion, alternatives, and choices around that, depending on what's appropriate in that particular culture at this particular time with that particular person. In some ways, I do wonder if it just goes back to building relationships, not saying you're wrong, I'm right, not saying this is what we have to do. And this is that balance between where do mandates by governments or local entities come in, and where does a change by example come in, and what makes, where do we build that empathy for the rest of the world, and where do we build empathy for other people in the world, and what can I live with and what can't I live with, and who am I, on the one hand, to say that you are entirely wrong? I have to be very careful. I'm so lucky to have what I have and live where I live. And I'm not sure it's up to me to say you can't have what I have and live the way I live, but how can I change my life differently so that there is more available for others, and yet learn from the mistakes that we have made maybe in some of our Western societies of excess is not what makes us happy. What is it that is going to make you comfortable, happy, feel good about yourself, and still want to engage with others as a community? I don't have the answer to this by any means, but I think, and it's so tied to how we view economics and how we view what does it mean to be successful. And, just in the translation work I did, I realized, there were some words where it was like, okay, I learned a lot about people's culture by the language. Like when we were translating things into Chinese, into Mandarin, there was a word that we used, apprentice. And when we tried to find the right word, we could find a direct translation, but that direct translation related back to when individuals were forced to work for other people to become an apprentice. So we had to find a different word that worked. So to me, I just have to be sensitive to what people know about themselves right there. That doesn't mean I can't introduce new things. It's just like when we go in to do a session at an interpretive site, we know the people on site are the experts. We're not the experts. We have a process they can use, and we want to help them use their expertise. So, we don't develop a plan and it sits on a shelf. That they develop a plan So we want to be very sensitive to the fact that they're the experts. How can we introduce new ideas and things that they can incorporate so they are going to feel good about what they produce and how they engage with others? Well, that was kind of a long-winded way to get to that. But, and like I said, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be successful in terms of the climate change thing, but I think we got to keep trying.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's many groups doing good work
Absolutely.
in English, and then to share it, to help encourage conversations, to do whatever they want to do with that resource to help others. There is that translation piece. Yeah. And yes, we don't know what life is like. None of those groups knows what life is like in all these different places across the globe. But I've just been more and more preoccupied with how do you take into consideration all of the different cultures to even start the conversation. And in your example with the word apprentice, see, those are nuances and little, things like that we need to know. But, a lot of people don't know unless you can speak the language and how all of that is defined and all those words and things. Yeah.
I will say, and while you were talking, I was thinking about that also. And I think one of the things that may help across cultures is that we don't get so focused on just the science. To me, that's this part, the head part, that we have to help people make connections, the heart part, with the things that they love around them, whether it's a waterfall, whether it's growing a field of rice, whether it is tending to a herd of sheep, whatever it might be. How do we help them find connections to the natural world to show this is part of that as well? The water, the soil, the sun, the air. How do we keep those things healthy and clean so we can stay healthy and clean? And how do we connect them in an emotional way? Because once people care about things and love things, they're much more likely to defend those kinds of things and care about them in a special way. If just knowing it sometimes doesn't get us there. It's so I think that was one of the great things about Steve's work, in the beginning and even now in Earth Education and in our work in EID. How do we, not just engage, but how do we involve and how do we delight? And that's that emotional piece. And that, I think, will connect us. A pretty butterfly in Arizona is a pretty butterfly in Central Africa. And how do we get people to appreciate that? A beautiful sunset in Arizona is a beautiful sunset somewhere else, and how do we go, yes, this is what's important.
Okay. Lars had mentioned that the academic text-based approach to interpretation is not working and that there's evidence of that worldwide. But sometimes the interpretive staff is not present. Sometimes it's a self-guided type of an experience. And so what might be the options if text-based panels and just other types of materials, brochures, were to be switched out? What might be put in place instead?
Okay. Self-guided trails. Boy, that's the $64,000 question in so many places. For those very reasons that you mentioned, staffing and just, we can't be available all the time for every different group or as people kind of come in. Once again, leisure time. They have their own time and pace that they want to do. From my point of view, I think it is getting people excited about the place. And some of that can happen before they come on the website or some kind of communication. And I think also how the welcome takes place can help them. And I think having them maybe see some ways they can organize their experience to get oriented to what is there and maybe even practice a few of those things. So, a nature center, a visitor center could be used to say, hey, here's something you might see over at this point. And we love maps. Bill and Lars and I love maps. Here's a map. At this point, you might be able to, this kind of soil changes from this to this. And here's what the two soils feel like. So practice feeling these two. So when you go out there, you'll be able to do that. Or here's some different bird songs you might hear. Here's this kind of bird, this kind of bird. So be listening at this point on the map. So on the one hand, it's very easy to produce something and put up some posts. But at the same time, what do we want them to take away? Once again, we're back to outcomes. What do we want them to leave with? How do we want them to engage with that and experience it? So I think there's a lot to be said for how do we set people up before we turn them loose. And that's those first 10 minutes when somebody arrives. The welcome, the orientation, a little bit of practice, not guiding somebody, but kind of a way to guide yourself. Boom. Then they're ready to go. And it might be using a brochure. It might be using a map. It might be a little booklet. But it's one that they can then put down some of their experiences that they've had along the way. And there may be some hints, hey, stop here, check out what's in the water. Maybe that's all you need to say. How many different living things did you see? Count to 10. How many living, just easy things like that. A historical site might have a whole different approach. There may be sacred ground in places where you want people to pause and stop and just, to me, there's no one size fits all. It depends on the site. And once again, I think a lot of that work done up front makes it a whole lot easier for the staff and the visitors to have their experience.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I could think of more questions about between environmental interpretation and environmental education. And what do you think is next for environmental education? Do you have a sense? I mean, what would change the status quo when it comes to environmental ed?
What would move the status quo? I think one of the things that if every person, every elected official had to take a class on how the earth operates and spent 15 minutes outdoors in a natural setting every day for a month. I think that's a start. I think in this country, unlike other countries, environmental education is focused on children. And in some ways, it's still seen as a child-centered experience. And the next level up has been, okay, how do we then safeguard water, air, the environment for everyone? So there's this big gap then between how do we get people to know what it's like to live an environmentally appropriate life, an earth-centered life, rather than an economic-centered life. Because the economics will come. It's going to happen. Let's face it. It's going to happen. There's let me see, The Ecology of Economics by Paul Hawkins. Yeah, The Ecology of Economics by Paul Hawkins, written many years ago. But once again, it talks about sustainable economics, not consumptive economics. We don't teach that. We have to grow. We have to grow. We have to grow. The only biological being that I know that continues to grow and will not stop is cancer. Everything else degrades. And the cancer only stops because the host dies, Mm-hmm. So how do we find sustainability and and start to have that heart connection from the very beginning. And that's one of the programs that the Institute for Earth Education, they have Earthborn, they have Earthlings, Nature's Family. How do we get build that into those younger formative years? But then there's also ones for adults, Earth Journeys. How do we get adults to connect to the earth and better understand and appreciate? So I think we've missed out in this country that the whole adult population that's not where environmental education is focused.
Yes, it's very K-12 focus.
It's very K-12 focus.
Organizational focus. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, Mike, thank you. Okay, so we are at the 1 hour mark. And is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about? Is there anything that was on your mind?
I think, in terms of experiential interpretive design, the thing that I think is important to Bill and Lars and I is building relationships with the people we work with. We want to keep in touch with them. We want to make sure that we understand where they're coming from, they understand where we're coming from, and that we work together for a common welfare so they have the outcome and the product that they want. It's not about us knowing everything. And so building a relationship with our clients, I think, is the most important thing, as well as highlighting the unique and specialness of the place that they are working at and they want others to experience. And Bill and I were very clear about that from the very beginning. We are not in this for the money. We are in this because we think this is a worthy thing to do. And we're lucky. Bill and I are retired, so we don't have to worry about that. Lars, I know, he's still a working guy. And I think, even Lars knows that it's how do we build relationships? I think all three of us realize that frontline interpreters work really hard. They have an important and difficult job, and sometimes they are not appreciated as much as they should be. And I just want to make sure that we're focusing more on how do we develop more planners. But having been a frontline interpreter and knowing what they have to often go through, do not want to in any way demean what they do. They are doing just what they need to do, and it's very important work.
To learn more about the Institute for Earth Education, the Amore Framework, and the book Interpretive Design and the Dance of Experience, reach out to Mike, Bill, or Lars through the EID website. You'll find a link to their contact information in the show notes. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time.